Welcome to DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside David Corbin. Glad to have you with us as we explore the ideas behind today's headlines.
My left eye sees pollution. Those dirty fuels are burning. The earth's whole climate's churning. Clean energy solution. My right eye scans the bill. Fossil fuels are cheap. Wind and solar too steep. Drill, baby, drill. Predefined, misaligned, polarized division. Shuttered mind, worse than blind. 2020
Happy summer, Dave.
vision.
It's now summer. That's great. Yeah, I think I told you when we are getting ready for the show that my office is on the second floor of our house in Colorado, and it's a south-facing house, and we're probably at 6,000 feet. So we're taping at about 2 p.m. your time, noon my time. I think I have an hour left before it becomes a sauna up here. So
Okay.
if we're speedy in our assessment of the topic today, you'll know that it's heat-driven.
Right. Nothing to add. Right. So tomorrow officially the first day of summer, but yesterday we had to put the AC on for the first time. We always try to stretch it out as long as possible. And oftentimes June here is really beautiful. You get, 70s, mid 70s, and we're a little bit up. We only have 1,000 feet elevation, but it's enough to make a little bit of a difference.
Yeah.
But man, it's been crazy. We've had 50s and 60s with rain, or now we're going right to 90s. So
Yeah.
we kind of missed June. We went from, May to mid-August or something like that.
Yeah, here it's been like Washington State, Seattle, just cloudy and rainy, which is some people say that happens every May and June, but it went on for about 3 weeks, and I was wondering, like, we came here to Colorado in part for the sun.
Right.
And haven't been able to see it for 3 weeks, but now we're gonna get a nice streak here of 10 beautiful days, and it gets nice and cold here, or cooler, I should say, at night. Gets into
Right,
the
yeah.
mid 50s, so that
Yeah.
helps out too. Yeah.
Cool the house down a little bit. Well, good. Yeah. So we're back with a new series. And what we were planning to do is we wrote a book together 15 years ago that was not a bestseller, but we've wanted to come back.
Close.
And
It was close
it
to
was
being.
close. Well, there was a week or two there because the college bought a whole bunch of copies. There was a week or two
Yes.
there where we were ranking on Amazon, but since then it's been a little bit thin.
We're
And
now
so,
at like ranked 10 million among all books in
yeah,
social sciences or something
right.
like
I
that.
looked today. I think we're in the 6 millions.
Okay.
So it's
All right.
not great, but we are listed on Amazon and Barnes and Noble though, so still available there. At least the ebook is on Barnes and Noble. But the real jumping off point for this was a few weeks ago. I don't know if you still get these in the mail, but I do. Get the royalties statement from the publisher. And it's kind of insulting because we've been getting these every quarter for years and years and years. And they only give you royalties check if you have $20 that they owe you. And so it's been a long time since we've gotten a check. And so we're up to $15.35 toward the next $20 check. And so I think, frankly, this is kind of like a potathon where we're trying to get, 15 sales, maybe 5 or 10 if it's ebooks, because we get a higher percentage of that, so that we can get over the top and get our check. I mean, obviously, we're not going to be able to put a down payment on a house with $20, but it'd be nice to get that money from stocks been keeping for us for these last 10 or 12 years. So, if nothing else, hopefully this series will allow us to get a few sales and push closer to that elusive $20 check.
I think you're underestimating what it would mean to me to move up from 6 million to like 4 millionth on that.
Well, it's true. I mean, I think if you get a sale, you actually move up into the 2 or 3 million range. So,
Okay.
maybe, by the time end of the day Saturday, when this podcast is out there, who knows where we'll be ranking. We'll have to be checking that on the hour.
Barnes and Noble, Amazon.com, Keeping Our Republic.
Yeah.
Wait, there's more. No, hold on. There isn't like nothing more.
I mean, you send the copy to us, we'll sign it. We would do that for you. We'll mail it back to you and sign it.
Yeah.
So
All
yeah,
right.
we're willing to do what it takes to get those 15 copies we need to get over the top, get that $20 check.
Okay.
But the book we wrote 15 years ago, I think it's actually a good time to come back to it. Keeping Our Republic, Principles for a Political Reformation. And the idea was basically this is early Obama years. So we wrote this, well, first term of Obama, but at the point where Obamacare was being debated and right up to the 2010 midterm election. So there's a little bit of reflection on that. That's really like the very last thing in the book, and it was published December 1st, 2010. So we're thinking about at that point, how do we restore the American Republic? And we talked about six key principles. And so what we want to do is focus on one of those basically each episode, probably have episodes every other week. At least we'll try to do that over the course of the summer. And the idea is let's go back to the principle. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about where we were in 2010, where we are today, look at some applications, and just try to think about how these principles have stood up. These are principles we believe are timeless statements of what it means to be a Republican citizen or statesman or to do Republican politics. And so we want to think about that a little bit more in our own contemporary context. Some of the things that we were looking forward to, whether in a positive sense or a negative sense, did come true. There were some other twists and turns that I don't think we anticipated in the book. So I think it'd be good to check in and think about this a little bit more over this summer as we kind of think about what it would mean to keep our republic today.
Yeah, the book was part of, I think I would call at that time, a 5 to 6 year project, and now expanded to Democracy in America Today, a 15-year project to try to revitalize America's politics by showing that those lower R Republican principles are not only applicable in the day of the founders, but can be very applicable today, and in many ways the remedy for what ails our politics today. So it is interesting to 10 years later, come back and see where these themes and these principles were applied then and can be applied now. And I'm looking forward to the next 12 weeks doing that. So maybe it'd be helpful, Matt, just to give kind of an overall introduction to our approach in the book, and then we'll get into this principle of equality.
Great.
We wrote 15 years ago that American politics is fundamentally broken, and that the problem cannot be fixed, simply by switching a Republican or Democratic administration. Of course, I think we both vote Republican and tend to believe more in Republican administrations than Democratic administrations. But at the end of the day, what we're dealing with as an issue in our country is something deeper. It has deeper roots. And we identified at that time the core problem as the progressive abandonment of America's foundational principles and heritage. Who was abandoning these principles? We argued that it was a deeply entrenched bipartisan ruling class. Of course, our mentor, Angelo Codevilla, a couple of years prior, had written a book called America's Ruling Class that explains who they were. But we also identified problematic trends in the early 2000 teens. Excessive spending and deficits, expanding government control over Americans' way of life, and then most importantly, a growing disconnect between the ruling class and the average American. And we weren't apocalyptic in our approach because, we truly believed then, and I think we believe now, that there was a rugged Republican path that we could follow and not lead us out toward a utopia, because we know that's impossible in the city of man, but to a better place. And that we did have these anchors in the past that we could turn to, an anchor such as the American founders' belief that this country could be built as an empire of laws and not an empire of men, where laws were made, executed, and enforced impartially and transparently. And they lay out that vision, albeit our imperfect nature, they lay out that vision and structure some 250 years ago. What has happened, however, primarily from the Civil War onward, is that we've moved away from those Republican principles. And it's had an influence both on how our statesmen act, how we as citizens act, and what our politics is like. So we argued in our introduction that we've moved from being, by and large, Republican citizens to post-Republican citizens. Our statesmen have moved from being Republican statesmen to post-Republican statesmen. Let me stress here again, not Republican Party, capital R, but lowercase r, Republic. And then this kind of shows itself in the behavior of both citizens, statesmen, and how we act. And we gave a couple examples of this. We argued that a Republican citizen understands that their equality, the principle we're covering for today, is found in dignity and moral responsibility, and in their demanding of their government impartial administration of the law. What do we see today? Well, oftentimes we see in post-Republican citizens that they've lost this understanding, and they often see government as a tool in which they can seek private gain, find their special interest group, and engage in rationalized plunder. Likewise, what did a Republican statesman act like? Well, a Republican statesman respected the rule of law and sought to uphold it, but post-Republican politicians, whether they're office seekers, demagogues, or would-be Caesars, prioritize their personal ambition and their control over men. And this is regardless of party. And this is happening among our post-Republican politicians. So this leads to a politics that stresses less the common good and stresses more private gain. So our thought was that if we could go through these kind of foundational principles of the American regime, beginning with equality, state what the principle meant to the founders and how that principle has been corrupted over time, that we might bring it back into the public discourse and maybe once again an anchor for the way that we do things.
Yeah, and just a little preview of coming attractions. So after that, we'll have responsibility, honor, justice, lawfulness, and prudence. And as you said, Dave, we're going to be really going back and forth from a founding era and in some cases Lincoln era examples and then contemporary application, and trying to think about how those principles really could inform revitalization of our republic in our day. And I think, in some ways we'll talk about what's changed and how things, have been altered by the last 15 years. But, the group that we were really trying to reach in 2009, 2010 was the Tea Party movement. And that was a group that had, obviously with the name, a great attachment to American history and the founding era. And there was a lot of energy around the Tea Party. And our thought was, well, the Tea Party needs a program. And obviously we don't presume to be people that can give a program to a national movement of billions of people, but throw our hat in the ring and say, okay, well, have you considered these ideas? Here's some principles that are available that really, I think, embody the things that you're standing for, that kind of gut level reaction to what was happening, let's say, with Obamacare and the threat of a national government takeover of healthcare and all the things, issues that arose around that. What's that gut level reaction to that? The way that money was being spent coming out of the Great Recession and the odd ways in which that money was being directed, contrary to what we thought was the original intention, to prop up the economy in a moment of crisis. And so there was this, people recognizing there's something wrong in all this. And we said, okay, well, yeah, that's right. There is something wrong in all this. And let's talk about the root principles that are being violated or denied, and then how we might return to those. And the challenge really, I think, that we posed to ourselves and to others is, and I think this is embodied in the principle of equality that we're starting out with today, is that good politics has to be about the common good. It has to be about ideas and ideals that don't just benefit the group in the majority. One of the observations that we made at the beginning of that book, which has continued over the last 15 years, is that we've been going back and forth, Republican president with Democratic Congress, the Democrat president with Republican Congress, and the cycle continues. And it seems like it's accelerated even in recent years, that now we've gone twice in a row where you've gone from a Republican to a one-term Democrat, now back to a Republican. And so, we're really in this almost hyper intense movement back and forth between parties, a sense of dissatisfaction with where politics is. The approval rating of the Congress is always underwater. The president's approval rating is usually underwater. The Supreme Court, even in recent years, has become less popular. So, the whole government, and you think about who says, we're on the right track, those kind of numbers are usually underwater also. So we're talking about consistent dissatisfaction And there's a lot of energy every 2 years, and then especially every 4 years for the election. And a moment perhaps people think, this is going to be the one where we finally get things right. And then very quickly dissatisfaction sets in again. Now, obviously, you have those that lost the election, so they're not happy. But that group that's been moving back and forth, which is a fairly sizable number of people, that group is quickly disillusioned once again. And so I just would get into this. There was a piece that's going to be, I guess, in the August issue of National Review, but it's now published on their website by Charles C.W. Cooke, where he's talking about this back and forth and the challenge that the average normal American faces in trying to engage politics in our day. And his basic notion is that if any one party, Democrats or Republicans, would just be normal for a while, they could create what would seem like a permanent majority, not a literally permanent majority, but they might win 2, 3, 4, 5 elections and be able to put together even a program over some years that takes some time to develop and build a consensus around some ideas. But there's just both parties in his analysis seem to be beholden to whether it's social media outrage, whether it's just stirring up the base for primary elections. It used to be there was a basic model for elections that tried to win the base in the primary, and then you move toward the center to try to win the general election. And that move toward the center has just not really been as characteristic of our politics in recent elections. Both campaigns were base campaigns in 2024, and that was, I think, true as well in 2020 and probably 2016. So the question is, can you get to a politics that isn't just about defining some existential threat, right? That this, if we lose this election, it's all over, and move beyond that into some kind of vision that could unite 65% of the population, not perfectly, but with some program that could be attractive to that group and useful for all, even if not everybody is on board. So he goes through this piece and he talks about some of the challenges that we face here, and I think it's a nice setup, for this discussion, because 15 years ago, again, we were seeing the same thing. You go back to 92, and you had throwing out all the bums. Remember the post office scandal, 1990, and then 92 in comes Clinton, and then 94, though, that was my senior year. For the first time in 40 years, Republicans took the Congress. And then 96, nevertheless, Bob Dole loses, Clinton's reelected, and then yet he has his term, but his successor, Al Gore, loses narrowly. And so here we go, right? I mean, that was the cycle, and that's continued right down to the present day. So 30 years of this back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And so what would it take to break that? And that's really the question. And so Cooke's answer to that is normalcy. And I think there's, a lot of what goes under the heading of normalcy is the kind of things we're talking about here. But I think what we're suggesting is that if you want to break that pattern, then you're going to have to think beyond the base. You're going to have to think beyond that 30% that's fired up, or maybe that 10% that's really, really fired up and carries you through the primary season, and think about principles that show respect for people across party lines, and not use the language in your political rhetoric that is so oriented toward dividing lines of us versus them, and so prone to caricature the position of others, and so existential in terms of every crisis that you describe as is the last chance to save the world from this problem, right? To be able to tone that rhetoric down and talk about ways that we can frame policy that would be good for everybody, and wouldn't be about punishing enemies and rewarding friends, but actually about seeking the good of all citizens.
When I read through Cooke's piece, Matt, as you mentioned, normalcy is the word at the center of his argument, a return to normalcy. And I understood and agreed with his criticism of how American politics have very much gone off the rails rhetorically, et cetera. One question I had, though, however, is the normal that Cooke is seeking to return to this consensus between a progressivism that's moved us away from founding principles, along with an individualism that stresses economic well-being, leave me alone, live free or die, et cetera. There's a good type of individualism, but an individualism in which we don't view ourselves as part of a social compact, a greater group of people, is an individualism that I think can be dangerous. So I think part of the pre-1990s normal was this, okay, as we were talking a couple weeks ago, we can be both bourgeois and bohemian. We can have
Right.
kind of our cultural progressivism and our fiscal conservatism. And I mentioned that, Matt, because monikers are imperfect, they're inexact, but there have been a lot of types of conservatism that have tried to respond to this progressive onslaught in the 20th century. You have neocons, right, who have preached national greatness and
Right.
intervention abroad. Paleocons, a return to kind of a traditional conservatism that's good because it's traditional. What we might call among the current Trump followers, popcons, populist cons.
Yep.
And I think that the way that I would describe our project and this book is that the type of conservatism that we believe is the best antidote to progressivism is American conservatism, an
Right.
American conservatism rooted in republicanism that's American, right?
Right.
It's that and so I think that I in mentioning that I wonder if the normal that we seek uh, must be a return to an old normal that's a different normal than the 20th century normal.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Cook would agree with that in terms of his own desire. I think what he's saying is just as an observer of politics, that there's a hunger for normal that could carry either party to success, maybe not earned success, if you will, or maybe not ultimately righteous success, but that at this point both parties seem bent on, catering to the most extreme views in their coalition, and
Yep.
so alienating those who are persuadable and who are their temporary allies every 2 or 4 years, but who then recoil in horror at what then follows when this group that they thought might help a little bit at the margins to push back against the eccentricity of the other group now has
Yep.
power and starts doing its own thing. So
Agreed.
yeah,
Yeah, all I would say on that is that I think if I'm understanding him correctly, understanding you correctly, what we're trying to get back to is a normalcy that is humane, that is
right,
not utilitarian. The 20th century normal was a utilitarian normal, but utilitarianism can be radicalized as well, right? Where utility becomes a tool used for your specific party or interest or ideology, and it can go off the rails, and that's what we've seen has happened. But well, how do we bring it back? So on this principle of equality, Matt, what is the principle? Where do we find it? Where do we see it established? And what does it mean? So, how would you define equality as the founders originally defined it, and its application to political life?
right. Well, obviously the most famous source for the principle is the Declaration of Independence, and I think the best interpreter of the Declaration was Abraham Lincoln, as he articulated in a number of speeches. There's a selection in a speech he gave on the Dred Scott decision that's probably the most famous statement of his interpretation of what the Declaration says and means and what it doesn't say and mean. But the idea is really, I think, plainly stated there in the Declaration itself that human beings, by nature, because of their common creator, have a certain natural dignity. It's not an intrinsic dignity, if you mean by that we would have it apart from God, but because it's part of being made in the image of God is bearing this dignity, and therefore because we each have that, there are no natural masters and slaves, no natural lords and serfs. And so, today we're recording this on Juneteenth, which is the holiday now celebrating the end of slavery and one of the key moments along that pathway in June of 1865 when the last slaves of Texas were freed under the Emancipation Proclamation. But that's really the embodiment of the principle, right? That there would be no natural masters and slaves. What follows from that is if you're going to have political leadership, it has to be by consent, because nobody can stand up in a crowd and say, "You must follow me. I demand your submission." Because there is nobody in a position to demand that submission, and nobody who has to feel the need to give that submission simply because it's been demanded. So what that means, and one of the things we worked out in this chapter at some length, is that all the claims, and this will sound very familiar in the COVID era, all the claims to expertise and the science and the doctors having the only word that can be heard on a matter is really out of bounds. That there may be expertise that needs to be brought to bear, obviously, in a situation of a pandemic, but that doesn't, once it's asserted, then therefore carry with it immediate political submission. There's a political process that has to unfold where there's attempts to persuade, where there's an opportunity to push back and to challenge and to raise questions and issues, and to recognize that technical expertise doesn't carry with it moral implications. The facts A, B, and C don't, as bare facts, tell us what to do about A, B, and C. And those are the very questions, of course, that politics is engaged with. And so one of the things we were really working toward in the original version of this set of reflections in the chapter on equality was, how do we think about the government taking such a large role in healthcare as it was proposing to do under Obamacare?
Yeah, and I think one maybe goes without saying, but let's be clear on this, that when we talk about the word equality, right, that word is loaded. So sometimes people take the word equality and they translate it to homogeneity,
Right.
or sameness, and that certainly wasn't the position of the founders. They realized that human beings had a diversity of gifts or talents. They were raised up in a diversity of circumstances. Some were given greater advantages by both their talents and their circumstances. But they understood that they were not going to be able, from the reaches of government, to be able to correct those diversities. That was not the job of government.
Right.
Equality meant kind of an equal filtering of the talents that you brought to bear, being able to bear fruit in your case. And that we would encourage opportunity as much as possible so that you, a human being with dignity, may be able to pursue happiness as you saw fit. So equality, rightly understood, is not the progressive vision for equality, which is equality forced
Right.
by the powers of the administrative state. Equality is government treating all of its citizens as equals because it respects their equal human dignity.
Where we're seeing applications of that today or questions about that today are really all these areas where we think about policies that benefit one group at the expense of another, that carve out tax benefits if you do X, Y, and Z, but not if you do A, B, and C, right? And so government has gotten very much in that business over the years. And one of the questions that I think arose at the time of the beginning of the second Trump administration was just how much effort would be made to reel those kinds of things in, right? As you try to go after the deep state, and as you try to go after the administrative state and all the bureaucratic elements that had opposed the first Trump administration, just how deep would that reform go, and just how much effort we put into trying to bring back a principle of equality that would be recognizably just to all, rather than just a replacement of a new group on top for the one that had been on top, let's say, for generations.
Yeah, you had mentioned earlier that back then when we wrote the book, the main issue was Obamacare, healthcare. And healthcare seems to be a settled issue now. Certainly, it wasn't repealed by the first Trump administration. Doesn't look like he's going to repeal Obamacare today, or this administration. Taxes also were a big issue back then. Still, I think, an issue today. But I mean, you have in the crafting of the latest big, beautiful bill, you have a sense as to what the populist response to progressivism will be. And what's your take on that, Matt? Do you see this principle of equality rightly understood at play in this bill, but just broadly speaking, not all of its specific parts, or What else do you see? Like, where have we gone right recently, and perhaps where have we misunderstood the principle?
Well, I think you certainly see the tone of our politics is certainly not a tone of equality. Right? The tone of our politics is an us versus them. Now it's time to even scores. And, you know, how much of that actually is going to be carried out? But it's just normal for President Trump to threaten somebody like Elon Musk when there's a breach. Well, watch out because you're going to lose your subsidies. You know, you're going to lose your government contracts, and you know that, of course, is not a good thing that this industry is subsidized. We were just saying that a minute ago, but the idea that political dissent or some kind of personal breach between two people can lead then to the government targeting certain benefits you should have by law, whether you should have them or not, right? Leaving that question aside for the moment, that's the style of our politics. Right? There's a punitive element to it. As the government grows in power, as it has more ability to reach the individual in their hearth and home, if you will, then that's a danger. And it doesn't seem like the Trump administration is going to use the big beautiful bill or any other mechanism in order to dial that back. And so, what are we likely to have 4 years from now, 8 years from now, 12 years from now, whenever the wheel turns again? Well, presumably there'll be some more score settling to do, and there'll be some more friends of the regime that need to be rewarded, more enemies that need to be punished, and more pregnant threats. Those kind of mob-like, nice business you have there. Be ashamed if anything were to happen to it. Right? That's kind of the implicit tone of our politics all too often. So, I don't know that the bill itself is any more objectionable than anything else, and probably better than many. But I just think it's the whole way that the executive branch is asserting its power, at least rhetorically, sometimes substantively, but at least rhetorically, to suggest you better be on our side or you're going to have problems.
Well, yeah, on that point, personal note, my father-in-law has been in the hospital for the last 6 weeks, and he's a great guy. Couldn't have any further different politics than myself. But I knew he was feeling good. He's needed to gain weight, so he's regained his appetite. But I knew he was doing well because he's regained his fire in his belly. So I spoke with him yesterday, and he said, "Kelly, what do you think? Given your expertise in politics, what do you think about Trump's fascistic tendencies?" And it tells you the tone, right, of our politics. And
Right.
I said, well, rhetorically, right, that what you just said, right, that you could view it in those terms, but what are you worried about? And the main thing that Dick was worried about was President Trump seeking a third term. And I said, well, I don't think that will pass muster with the Supreme Court, right? There's a constitution that'll be upheld, I think,
Yeah.
and I asked him though, I mean, you have a difficulty with what you see as Trump's fascism, but you had no difficulty with the Biden puppet presidency. You had no difficulty with the cover-up that Biden really wasn't the executive, although titularly he had the title.
Right.
He wasn't. Do you see anything wrong with that? Do you see anything unconstitutional with that? Well, I blame the Democratic leaders, but well, we elect a president, right, who has the composition to be able to carry out the office. And if
Right.
he's not doing that, and you're feigning that, then that's as additionally problematic. But I mentioned that, Matt, because I think that a lot of what we're talking about has to be a change in tone, and
Hmm.
that seems to be the big hurdle, right? Is to get beyond
Yeah.
the tone of post-Republican politics, where it is tit for tat, over and over and over again. And we certainly, no matter what legislation is brought forward, no matter how much we want to rightly improve the lives of every American, and particular those who have been lost in the new economy, et cetera,
Hmm.
if we don't return to that type of discourse, we're going to be in trouble. And I see that as an even greater danger. Like 15 years after writing the book, I mean,
Yeah.
what are some of the things that have changed? Well, certainly the medium in which you can communicate has changed. The
Hmm.
immediacy of
Right.
that communication has changed. The amount of information that is out there has changed. And not only are we seeing an erosion of middle America, but I think we're seeing a further erosion, not due simply to these technologies, but to the improper use of them, a further erosion of the republic. So how might we We want to return to a right understanding of equality, and we want to apply it to our politics today. Are there any specific areas where you could see an opportunity there to employ equality rightly understood in a way that would improve the regime and improve the republic?
One of the places to speak of a positive development that things have changed dramatically in the last 15 years has been with the Supreme Court. And so, of course, today every Supreme Court decision is framed as ideological, as political, as this six conservative justice block against the three progressive justice block. But I think if you really were to get beyond the partisan element of it, you would see that there's something going on in the Supreme Court, which is a return to this principle of equality. Now, why do I say that? Well, because what is it that makes the original meaning of the Constitution a better interpretive tool than any other? It's the fact that the people made the Constitution. It's out of respect for human equality that we say, okay, we can only be governed then by a Constitution that we have approved and that people did approve and have had a chance to amend over the years and to modify in various contexts and develop, but only through certain mechanisms, through constitutional mechanisms that build a consensus, a popular consensus that allows for the people to truly govern. And so when the Supreme Court follows the original meaning, whether it's the 1787 document or whether it's an amendment that was ratified later, it's doing so out of respect for Republican equality. And so as we return to original meaning as the dominant interpretive principle for the Supreme Court, that's a really important development. And if we can get that institutionalized to a degree that we start to understand that it's not just about an R versus D, conservative versus progressive, or whatever dynamic, and maybe that's just too much to ask, but if we could actually get to the point where we're beginning to understand, let's say because there's some Supreme Court decisions that don't go Trump's way, according to original meaning interpretation. So it's not just a blindly partisan thing, because it won't be if they truly follow original meaning. If we can get to that point where it starts to become perplexing, well, why are they coming to these conclusions? They're not just choosing what Trump wants. They're not just opposing what Democrats want. It's more complexity to it. If we can get to that point and start to unpack the idea behind it, then we start to see, oh, there's meant to be one law for all, a law established by regular processes, a law applicable to all people, regardless of the personal opinions of the judges. Those are really powerful principles. And I think seeing that happen in the judiciary might help to then allow that principle to be applied in other places, right? To start to see, as we object to the subsidies that are given to this industry or that industry, we might be able to see the common principle there. As we start to see the way the Supreme Court is reasoning through questions, it might be possible for us to start to follow a model that leads to a consideration of the deeper principles rather than just a matter of partisan advantage. Now, that's optimistic. But
yeah, but I mean, the verb you use there over and over again, I think, is the verb that we rightly should use if there is going to be a reformation. And it's the verb see. We need to see. And
right.
seeing, right, means being able to understand what is before you, being able to reason. Right? You can't
Right.
have an empire of laws rather than an empire of men if you don't see the value in the laws, right? The truth in the laws,
Right.
and you understand them. And I think this is why you and I, both as educators, see the importance of education
Yes.
as a springboard to returning back to an empire of laws. And this is the one big, you said, okay, that's optimistic, but I don't think it's necessary that we have to be servile. I don't
Yeah.
think it's necessary that we have to continue to move in a servile direction. I've been on a Joseph Pieper kick lately, kind of trying to read everything I can get my hands on from Pieper. And this was Pieper's big argument that he makes in the 20th century, is that we'll continue to move toward a servile age if we are unable to, and he uses the term that's really interesting, to deproletarianize modern man.
It's a mouthful.
Really, really. So he's using Marx's term proletariat. Of course, Marx uses that word with a ideological bent, right? That this is sewn into the nature of history, right? That the proletariat would overcome, right?
Right.
The master capital class. But he sees all forces kind of moving us toward this proletarian citizenship in which we're led by politicians who master proletarian populations. And I look to his analysis and kind of taking up this principle of equality. And if we can deproletarianize our politics, I think we'll be in better shape. So what would that mean to deproletarianize our politics? Well, using his terms, two things he says need to happen. We need to enlarge the scope of life beyond the confines of a useful or servile politics. And then secondly, we need to widen the sphere of liberal, and by liberal here, he means free or humanizing
Right.
politics. So enlarge the scope of life beyond the confines of the useful and widen the sphere of liberal or humanizing politics. And so much of our politics, in being special interest, in being let me get my part of the pie, has become a very kind of utilitarian enterprise,
Right.
rather than enterprise that is ennobling to the human being. So he'll throw out, some solutions that he saw in the early 1970s, and we may agree or disagree with them, but he suggests that what might encourage both the enlarging of the scope beyond the utilitarian and the widening of the sphere of the liberal or humanizing politics. One, enabling wage earners the opportunity to save and acquire property. Two, limiting the power of the state. And this three, I think, this is the key one, and this is where education is crucial. Overcoming the inner impoverishment of the individual. How can we grant to another dignity if that dignity is being corrupted by inner impoverishment? And we see a variety of ways in which that's happening. But I would also say, Matt, that none of these three solutions that he puts forward are novel, right? You would see them in the thoughts of the founders.
Sure.
Yeah. Enabling wage earners the opportunity, and in Lincoln, enabling wage earners the opportunity to save and acquire property, limiting the power of the state, overcoming the inner impoverishment of the individual. I think that's all part of the founders and Lincoln's project.
When you think of what's impoverishing the individual today, and you mentioned it briefly earlier, I think it's the way that we use technology to a significant degree. And obviously, we're grateful for the fact that we've got Zoom. We can do these podcasts. You're in Colorado. I'm in New Jersey. We can do this. I can edit it on a computer and have it out in 2 days. And, you couldn't have done that 30 years ago, 20 years ago. And you can get out there and get some great pictures on your iPhone and do whatever. But this technology is raising serious questions, right? If we're not really careful about how we're using it. We just got our daughter, well, actually my parents got our daughter her first cell phone as a graduation gift. And we held out a long time because we thought it was best for her until she really needed it, not to have it. And so now she's like, everybody else, and she's got her phone. And so, we hope that that's something that she can, like we can, use responsibly. But boy, there's a lot of danger in that and a lot of distraction. The fact that you're reading Joseph Pieper is a great testimony because it's easy to spend your day scrolling or reading things that are here today and gone tomorrow. So I think hearing a voice that is worried about this inner impoverishment at a stage where the source of that was different from today. Nevertheless, I think it rings really true in our own society, and I think we see all the more the need for us to be consciously cultivating the soul.
Yeah, he wrote another book. I'm sorry, I'm on this kick though, but another book that is right on the point of technology. The book was titled, and I would recommend this to all our listeners. The book is titled "Abusive Language, Abusive Power," and you could retitle that today, "Abuse of Language and Technology, Abuse of Power," because his main argument in that book is kind of 5 parts to his argument. Real quick here, though, that the words that we use in our discourse convey reality. And we convey that reality to one another. So our speech is interpersonal. If you're on a phone, you're staring at a screen, how much interpersonal activity are you having in which you're conveying reality through your words with another? Very little.
Right.
But also on these phones, there's a whole bunch of lies. And Pieper says lies are the opposite of communication because lies don't convey reality to another. They
Right.
convey non-reality. And any discourse detached from the norms of reality is just a monologue. How many times are we scrolling and just monologuing,
Hmm.
disconnected from others? Uh, and then lastly, and you also see this with the use of social media devices and all the rest, Pieper argues we live in an age that has abandoned this understanding of reality and communication, an age that believes what is decisive is not the truth of what you say, but the style and how you say it. Right? And that we
Boy, is
see
that on
that
point. Yeah.
that's so on point. And let me just finish with this part that I think is just a wonderful paragraph. It brings us back to this principle of equality from Pieper. The very moment, as I have stated, that someone in full awareness employs words, yet explicitly disregards reality, he in fact ceases to communicate anything to the other. He is using language as an instrument of power. He no longer considers the other as a partner, as an equal. In fact, he no longer respects the other as a human person. I mean, I don't think we can say any better than that. And that's what we need to get to, right? Respecting the other person as a human person, as an equal, and using a language that conveys reality and that's grounded in truth, not ideology.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's a great place to leave it. Next time, again, we'll be moving forward with our second principle, responsibility, which has to do with the moral realities that we can't ignore, and yet we often try to ignore. So we'll talk about the implications of that and how that plays itself out in our day, as it did back in 2010 when we wrote the book originally. So we wrap up, as always, with Tocqueville's crystal ball. It's been a little while since we had a little extra long break there for the end of the school year. But last time we made our Kentucky Derby picks, and you introduced us to this special bet where you picked the top five. I don't think either of us was able to do that exactly, but I mean, we weren't horrible. I got the winner right. You had the top two correct in the wrong order. After that, it got a little bit ugly. I had a bunch of 30-1 shots, and you had some longer shots that didn't come through. But I don't know. Overall, maybe a B minus. What'd you say?
Oh, I'm down $62, from my bets over the
Okay.
Triple Crown. I mean, it's not. I mean, we get that 20 back because the books are going to sell. I'm down 42.
Okay.
So and ready to go to Saratoga in early August.
All right.
But yeah, I mean, I think you did well. You chose sovereignty. By the way, you went with the MAGA solution, right?
Yeah. Right.
Sovereignty, coal battle, clean, beautiful coal battle,
Yep.
American promise, admire Daytona, chunk of gold. Uh, you were much more American, but we're going to stick with the American theme. We're Americans, right? So we were going to
Right.
move to the crystal ball on July 4th. And is there anything more American on July 4th? Probably there is, but than the Nathan's hot dog eating competition.
Not much more. Yeah.
There's not much in Coney Island. And, it proves, right, that all men are created equal, but not all competitive eaters are created equal
That
because
is
Joey
correct.
Chestnut has dominated this competition. So it's not a question of whether Chestnut will win, but how
Right.
many hot dogs will Chestnut eat? So Matt, what is your prediction? July 4th. I think our
Yep.
next taping is July 3rd, so it won't go out until July 5th.
Right.
So we won't know the results of this in our next. But how many hot dogs does Joey eat?
Well, let's get a little context here. So, Joey had a nice stretch from 2016 to 2021 where he was in the 70s every year, from 70 to 76, trending upward just slightly over that period of time. Then 2022 went down to 63. 2 years ago, 62. Last year, of course, excluded because
Like
of
Barry
some.
Bonds post steroids, right? And you just kind
Yeah, right. You begin to wonder, right? Is he just getting a little bit older? I mean, he won 16 years in a row, so you can't, fault the guy. But so, I'm not sure he's going to be able to get back up into those higher numbers. I think he can win. I think last year was 58 was the winning number with the number two guy from previous years. So I think he's going to have to get to 60 in order to win. I think he'll do that, but I think it comes in about 65.
I think you're way underestimating
Okay.
Joey.
All right.
Uh, You probably don't follow competitive eating like I do, Matt.
Quite
You
possibly.
probably did not see last September's Netflix unfinished beef competition that
Mm.
Joey had with Kobayashi,
Oh,
where,
Kobayashi,
by the
yeah.
way, not only did he break the threshold of 80 hot dogs, but set a new world record of 83 hot dogs.
Wow.
So here's my take.
Okay.
Number one, I think he's ready to put his beef with Nathan's hot dog aside after
Nice.
they had a cow over his getting another sponsor. I'll just say that right now.
Okay. All right. Just first
Number
principles.
two, he's beefed up and he's ready to go.
Okay.
And then
Good.
finally, not only will he meet, but he
Yes.
will
Nice.
exceed his prior record of 76 hot dogs. He will eat 80 hot dogs July 4th, 2025.
80 hot dogs and the rolls. That's just extraordinary. I mean, when you think about that, this, there's something so crazy about it. It's pure Americana, but then you think step back and you think about literally having 80 hot dogs in your body at one time. It's really something. Well,
Like a
we'll see.
beautiful tennis match between Roger Federer and Djokovic or something like that. It's on that level.
Exactly. Yep. Well, it'll be fun to watch. We try to find it on ESPN every year to catch that. So, yeah, 80. You say I say 65. Either way, I think he comes out on top. Well, we'll leave it there for now. We'll be back, Lord willing, in a couple of weeks and talk about responsibility. If you want to reach out to us, you can contact us at democracyinamericatoday@gmail.com. We
Buy the
hope you
book. Remember to
buy
buy
the
the
book.
book.
Yeah, please buy the book. Get us our $20 checks. Love to have those by the 4th of July as well. We'll talk to you again soon.
2020 vision.